You smell it before you see it. A thick, clinging rot, sweet at first, like bruised fruit left too long in a sealed jar. But then it turns, curdles, deepens. It seeps through the palace stone, through wool and velvet and bone. No door keeps it out. No incense chases it away. It settles in your throat like damp smoke. The closer you get, the harder it becomes to pretend you're breathing air. The halls are nearly silent now. Voices reduced to whispers. Footsteps muffled by the weight of dread. Servants come and go like ghosts, heads bowed, faces pale. Not from reverence but from nausea. They trade shifts like soldiers guarding a cursed tomb. Some refuse to enter at all. Inside, the chambers are dim. Candlelight flickers against walls lined with stained silk. The fire has long since been allowed to die. Fresh logs remain untouched in the corner. Not for lack of need, but because the smell grows worse when it's warm. There, in the center of the room, she sits, upright, draped in layers of sodden fabric. Not lying down. She hasn't been able to for days. Her belly is too swollen, her spine too curved, her skin too raw. The chair was built for her suffering, carved hastily by hands that trembled, stuffed with cushions, all of which are soaked now, stained dark with fluids no one dares name aloud. Her head tilts to the side, as if it no longer has the strength to stay level. Her cheeks have sunk. Her lips are split open, rimmed in black. Her eyes half-lidded, jaundiced, unseeing. But she is not dead. Not yet. Her hands are resting on the armrests, barely. What's left of them. The fingers are stiff, discolored, almost purple. The nails have begun to lift. The flesh beneath is hardening, cracking, dying. She makes a sound. Not a cry, not a word. Just a breath escaping a throat filled with phlegm and blood. It gurgles. It bubbles. Then it fades into silence again. Every few minutes, a priest steps forward and mutters a prayer. His eyes never meet hers. He looks at the crucifix instead, as if it might blink back. The chamber reeks of sanctity and rot, of candles and something far older, something from the earth, something dug up too soon. Nothing in this room is alive, not really. Not the queen, not the attendants, not the air. Everything here is only pretending. You try to hold your breath, but it doesn't help. The decay wraps around you like a velvet curtain, presses into your skin, it follows you into your mouth. This is a death no one expected to take so long. This is not the quiet slipping away of a royal matron. This is not the noble exit of a ruler at peace. This is a siege, of the body, of the soul. A slow, humiliating surrender. The Queen of England is rotting alive. And you ask yourself, how does a woman born in silk and crowned in glory end like this? The body had begun to rebel long before the court admitted it. What began as fatigue had bloomed into a grotesque spectacle of decline. Mary's stomach distended outward, smooth and taut, stretched unnaturally like a drum pulled too tight. Her physicians first called it hope, a pregnancy, a divine miracle. After all, her belly swelled. She vomited in the mornings. Her breasts became tender. Her appetite vanished. But months passed. No child kicked. No labor came. No cries of new life echoed through the palace. Just silence. Then whispers. Then dread. What the court believed to be a royal womb preparing for birth was, in truth, a tomb. Inside her, tissue twisted upon itself. Modern medicine, centuries too late, would name it likely for what it was, ovarian cancer or perhaps a uterine tumor of catastrophic size. The distension fooled her, fooled the men who dared not contradict her, fooled even her own mind. But the mass kept growing, feeding on blood and organ, pressing against bowels, twisting the gut, grinding her insides into putrefaction. The yellow hue that overtook her skin was not the glow of maternal warmth, but the unmistakable sign of advanced liver failure. Cirrhosis, likely brought on by years of stress, grief, and untreated inflammation. Her eyes turned to honeyed glass, her fingernails to slate. Beneath her garments, jaundice and vascular starvation painted her body in bruises no one dared name. Physicians recorded the change in cautious Latin and trembling script. Distentio abdominis ad modum monstro. Abdominal swelling to monstrous proportions. Cutis nigra. Odor putris. Clamor perpetuus. Blackened skin. Putrid odor. Constant screaming. One attendant noted that even when unconscious, she groaned. That her breath whistled through blood in her throat. That her urine came black as ink, laced with clots. Her bowels, when they moved, expelled a sludge so foul that rooms had to be abandoned. Sheets were burned, carpets destroyed, linen washed again and again, but never fully rid of the rot. The palace tried to hide it. Curtains were drawn, candles relit, doors sealed, but the truth leaked out, through cracks, through walls, through the noses of every diplomat, servant, and page who passed by. Mary herself held onto the fantasy of pregnancy for as long as she could. She prayed over her belly, chose godparents, selected a name. The royal cradle was pulled from the vault. Midwives stood ready, but the child never came, because there was no child. There never was. Modern gynecologists today have studied the records and believe she may have suffered from pseudocyesis, a rare condition in which the body mimics pregnancy due to hormonal imbalance, trauma, and overwhelming psychological need. Her womb, in grief and desperation, lied to her. It swelled for something it would never deliver. And what her womb would not give her, her flesh took away in return. Because the mass did not stop, pressed into her lungs. It suffocated her appetite. It weakened her muscles. The swelling grew so intense that her skin tore in places, small fissures opening at the sides of her abdomen. They wept fluid, sometimes blood, and often worse. And still, she insisted she was carrying England's future. She wasn't. She was decaying. The body of a queen hollowed from the inside. Her disease wore a crown before it ever reached her brain. And yet, the cries she made, deep in the night when no one else dared move, were unmistakably human. Not regal, not divine, just pain. The pure sound of something that does not want to die, yet cannot bear to keep living. And now ask yourself, how many screams does it take before a monarch becomes only a woman again? How much rot before truth overtakes ceremony? The pain in this woman's body was so extreme, even her enemies started to pray for her death. If you can stomach hearing the truth, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. And if you won't subscribe, at least tell us why in the comments. Seriously. What's stopping you? Are you afraid of history when it stinks? Or just ashamed to face the truth of what royalty really looks like? When stripped of titles, silks, and prayers? Because what's coming next is far worse. She was born into velvet. England called her the Pearl. Her cradle was carved from walnut and inlaid with mother of pearl, swaddled in fabrics from Italy, perfumed with rosewater. Mary, daughter of King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine of Aragon, was England's only legitimate heir. Ambassadors bowed before her. Courtiers called her clever. Her Latin was perfect by age 9. Her handwriting more elegant than most men's. She was destined, they said, not to marry greatness, but to become it. But pearls crack under pressure. The first fracture came not with a sword, but with a whisper. Henry wanted a son. And Mary was not a son. He blamed Catherine, then turned on her, then slowly on Mary. At 12, she stopped being a princess, not in ceremony but in silence. Her father stopped visiting. Her tutors were dismissed. Her chambers moved from the palace center to its coldest wing. At 15, she was told her mother's marriage was null, that she herself was illegitimate. The king's decree erased her with ink. She became Mary, Lady Mary, not Princess of England. Her household disbanded, her banners stripped. The servants who once bowed now looked through her. And then came the worst order of all. She was to serve in the household of the child who replaced her, her infant half-sister Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom her mother had been discarded. So she knelt, a teenager, noble by birth, kneeling to a baby. Each bow was a ritual humiliation. Each day, she wrote her name without title. Letters once signed with royal flourish now ended simply, Mary. Her hands shook. Her voice trembled, but she did not cry, not where anyone could see. But the body always keeps the score. The bright, quick girl who charmed Spain's ambassadors began to change. Her skin turned pallid. Her eyes ringed with shadow. She stopped eating for days, then binged until she vomited. Her menses, once regular, became erratic. Sometimes she bled for weeks. Other times, nothing came for months. She began to suffer debilitating headaches, days lost to pounding pain and nausea, fainting spells in the chapel, blackouts during lessons. Her tutors recorded moments of brilliance interrupted by collapse. And always, she clung to her faith. When her father forced her to attend Protestant services, she felt it like a desecration. The Latin Mass was her sanctuary. Her mother's voice echoed in the Ave Maria. But now she was made to kneel before what she saw as heresy. Felt like betrayal, like filth. She began to wash obsessively after these ceremonies. Silent, scrubbing until her skin burned. Not for vanity, for cleansing, as if Protestantism had touched her skin. And through it all, her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was kept far away, forbidden from writing, forbidden from seeing her daughter, dying slowly in a series of cold stone rooms while Mary was moved like a political pawn between castles and courtiers who no longer knew what to call her. The bond between them was severed by decree, and Mary never forgave the world for it. You look at the young woman now, standing alone at her window, her face turned toward nothing, and you realize she was never given the chance to grieve like a daughter. She had to grieve like a traitor, in silence, in obedience, and in that silence, something began to fester. The bright girl became guarded, then cold, then hard. The seed of vengeance was not planted in power, it was planted in powerlessness. It didn't matter that she would one day become queen. The damage was done long before the crown touched her head. This was not just a dethroned princess. This was a spirit bruised in slow motion, a soul fed on abandonment, exile, and daily humiliation. And long before her skin rotted, her trust had. You don't have to sympathize with what she became, but if you can't understand why she became it, you've already missed the warning. Because this is where tyranny begins. Not in palaces, not in churches, but in children. In the moment their innocence is treated as a liability. When power becomes their only armor. When love is replaced by fear, and softness becomes a death sentence. She was made into a weapon, and she would spend the rest of her life trying to prove that her suffering had meant something. And now, look at her again. The dying woman in the chair, the blackening skin, the cracked lips whispering Latin prayers. The rot didn't begin in her belly. It began here. If you've followed this far, if you've seen the girl inside the monster, then subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and help us tell the stories others bury. And if not, if you've already judged her, sealed her fate, turned away, then tell us why in the comments. What is it about the truth that makes you hesitate? Is it the smell of decay, or the echo of something that feels too familiar? She had no throne, no crown, no allies, but she had one thing left. Her God. Not the reformed God of her father. Not the English God, newly scrubbed of Latin and incense. Her God was older, bleeding, crowned with thorns, whose mother wept over him in candlelight. The God of holy pain, of sacred sorrow, the God who watched but did not intervene. And in him she saw herself. She clung to Catholicism not as religion, but as identity, as memory, as mother. When Catherine was taken, when her title was stripped, when she was forced to kneel to a squirming infant, the only thing that did not leave her was the Mass. The Latin rites were her rebellion, the crucifix was her banner, and the rosary beads, wrapped tight around her fingers, became the armor she wore when all else had been taken. But faith, when weaponized by grief, mutates. Every humiliation deepened her piety. Every sickness felt like a divine test. Every insult she endured reinforced her belief that she was chosen because she suffered. When she was ordered to attend Protestant sermons, she complied, but wept in private. Not out of sadness, but from violation. She was made to hear priests denounce the saints, strip the altars, preach in a language that felt to her like ash in the mouth. It wasn't just her dignity they attacked. It was her soul. And the more she was forced to submit, the more she became convinced. God had not forgotten her. He was refining her. She wasn't abandoned. She was being purified. Every injustice, every exile, every lie spoken over her was proof. She was Job. She was Mary Magdalene. She was the handmaid of the Lord, awaiting her resurrection. And what was her resurrection? A child, a Catholic heir. If she could endure the trial, she would be rewarded. If she remained faithful, if she bled and prayed and suffered enough, God would open her womb, and from it would come the salvation of England. Her belief wasn't naive. It was forged in trauma. She had seen her mother waste away in exile. She had watched her country turn its back on the religion that had once given it spine and crown. She had listened as Protestants called her faith idolatry and her prayers superstition. And so, when she finally took power, years later, scarred and hardened, she didn't see it as victory. She saw it as vindication. She hadn't been wrong. They had been. And now she would prove it. But that part of the story is still to come. What matters here, what you must not forget, is that her fanaticism did not come from doctrine. Came from pain. From years of being told she was nothing unless God said otherwise. From watching power wielded against the sacred. And from learning, too young, that to survive, she had to make her suffering sacred. Faith didn't heal her. It justified her. And by the time she reached the throne, that faith had grown teeth. If trauma can break a princess into a persecutor, what do you think power would do to you? Subscribe if you believe these stories should still be told. And if not, go ahead, scroll down and defend your silence. Tell us why a history like this is better left forgotten. We're still listening, even if you aren't. The wedding was not a celebration. It was a contract. Mary was 37. Philip of Spain just 26. 11 years her junior, bred for empire, not for love. The match was political, designed not to comfort her soul but to restore Catholic supremacy across Europe. Two sovereigns aligned by religion, divided by blood, distance, and desire. The marriage was met with unease. English nobles whispered behind fans and goblets, calling it a foreign yoke. Protestants braced for another purge. Even Catholics prayed that the alliance would not swallow England whole. Mary, however, saw something else. A husband, partner, a man sent by God. She fell hard. He did not. Philip arrived in England with ceremony but not affection. He treated the marriage like diplomacy, smiling at banquets, bowing to tradition but never to Mary. In private he was cold, formal, distant. He spoke of heirs, not intimacy. He left gifts but not warmth. And still Mary hoped. And then, miracle, her belly began to swell. Her appetite shifted. Her skin grew flushed. She woke nauseated, dizzy, radiant. The court rejoiced. Physicians examined her and declared it true. The queen was with child. Chapel bells rang across London. Foreign embassies sent congratulations. Portraits were painted. Names were chosen. Midwives were summoned. A nursery was built within the palace walls, draped in crimson and gold. The baby was coming, a Catholic heir to redeem the Tudor name. But there was no child, only the illusion of one. Modern medicine calls it pseudocyesis, a false pregnancy, where the mind tricks the body. Symptoms mimic the real. Swelling, sickness, breast tenderness, even the sensation of fetal movement. It can happen when the desire is desperate enough. When the need becomes belief, and belief becomes biology. Others suspect hydrometra, the accumulation of fluid in the uterus, caused by a tumor or infection. The body reacts, the belly grows, but it is not life. Inside Mary something was forming, but not a child. Time passed. Her due date approached, then passed again. No labor came, no water broke. She kept waiting, she kept praying. And still, nothing. Whispers began. Some said she was cursed. Others that the baby had died. A few murmured treason, that there had never been a child at all. The court walked on eggshells, terrified of her wrath. But Mary believed. She believed long after belief became absurd. She laid hands on her stomach and sang psalms to it. She refused wine, kept vigil, prepared for baptism, until one day, she stopped. No proclamation was made, no public announcement. The cradle remained empty. Philip had seen enough. He left England, returning to the warmth of Spain, to women who were younger, prettier, and more compliant. His letters to Mary became shorter, colder, purely political. He had never loved her. That much was now clear. And without an heir, she was useless to him. Mary was left in a palace that smelled like rosewater and disappointment. The nursery was sealed. The midwives dismissed. The court moved on. She didn't, because something inside her had broken. Not her womb, but her certainty. She had believed so fully, so devoutly, that God would reward her suffering with legacy. But there was no child, no redemption, no miracle, only emptiness. She had endured exile, humiliation, isolation. She had obeyed God in everything. She had restored the Mass, burned the heretics, married the Spanish prince. And he still said no. In that silence something hardened. Hope turned to bitterness. Delusion turned to fury. Love turned to fire. And the fires would soon come. But before we reach them, ask yourself this. If a queen can be broken by longing, what would it take to break you? Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles if you understand the ache of believing in something that never arrives. And if not, go ahead. Tell us why in the comments. Tell us what makes you immune to illusion. We'll wait, just like she did. The first to burn was a man she once admired. Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. The same man who had placed the crown on her mother's head. The same man who later stripped it away, annulling the marriage, branding Mary a bastard, erasing Catherine from history with a single signature. When Mary came to power, she didn't strike him down immediately. She waited, watched, let him twist in uncertainty. And then, when the firewood was stacked, when the crowd had gathered, when the smoke from earlier burnings still clung to the city walls, she gave the order. Cranmer was forced to watch as his friends and fellow reformers were burned first. Slowly, publicly, their screams echoing through the squares of Oxford. Then he was dragged before the same fire. He recanted. He begged. He swore allegiance to Rome. But Mary had no interest in mercy. He had insulted her mother, her church, her blood. So she demanded more. A spectacle. He was brought to the flames anyway. And when the fire took him, he held out the hand that had signed the annulment, held it in the blaze as the flesh melted away, declaring it the first to burn. Witnesses say Mary smiled. One of the few times she did. It didn't end there. The fires spread like sermons. Over the next 3 years, nearly 300 men, women, and children were burned alive for heresy. Not slain with sword or locked in tower, but publicly consumed by flame. Their names read aloud. Their crimes, reading English Bibles, refusing to attend Massachusetts, owning Protestant tracts, praying in the wrong language, teaching children the wrong prayers. Mary didn't burn them in secret. She made a stage of it. The executions were scheduled at market hours. Bells rang. Crowds gathered. Bishops preached. Soldiers pushed families forward, so no one could look away. Children watched their mothers weep into smoke. Husbands watched their wives ignite. Some victims sang hymns as their skin cracked and blackened. Some prayed for Mary as they died. But Mary didn't flinch. She believed she was saving them. To her, the flames were purifying. Fire was not cruelty, it was medicine, a harsh, holy cure for spiritual disease. She believed that forced repentance, even at the stake, meant salvation. And if a soul screamed on its way to heaven, so be it. She did not burn them to terrorize. She burned them to cleanse. The burnings became her obsession. She reviewed the cases personally, demanded written recantations, corresponded with bishops about particularly stubborn heretics, insisted that sermons be given just before the match was struck. The Queen of England was not ruling. She was conducting a ritual, turning flesh into testimony, bodies into warnings, smoke into prayers. And when foreign dignitaries expressed horror, even the Pope in hushed letters, Mary dismissed them. They didn't understand. Only she knew what was at stake. She wasn't killing people. She was saving a nation's soul. One execution at a time. And the smell of human fat on open flame became part of England's wind. Ash settled in the alleys. Charred bones were buried shallow. The wood ran low in winter. But still she ordered more. The woman who once scrubbed herself clean after Protestant services now used fire to wash the country itself. Heretics were not citizens. They were infections. And the cure was agony. Now, you've seen her as a daughter, as a queen, as a woman who wept into empty cradles. But here she stands in the firelight, unshaken, unbending. So now tell me, would you forgive a woman who believed she was saving souls by watching them burn? Comment below. And if you want to learn about the darkness hidden behind royal titles, hit subscribe. Or are you too afraid to? She thought she was saving England, but Europe was already recoiling. At first, her fellow Catholics watched with cautious admiration. A queen who did not flinch. A sovereign willing to cleanse her realm in fire. They applauded her resolve. Whispered of her as a new Constantine, unyielding in the face of blasphemy. But as the bodies mounted and the smoke grew thick, that applause turned to silence. Then unease. Then shame. Even the Vatican, ancient seat of her beloved church, began to murmur behind heavy doors. Papal advisors sent private letters, urging moderation, suggesting she slow the burnings, not for mercy, but for optics. The world was watching, and Rome feared the damage. Her fires were creating not converts, but martyrs. Still she did not stop. So Rome turned its face, and Philip, her husband in title, her stranger in truth, drifted further away. He had gotten what he came for. An alliance, a foothold in English politics, a brief flash of influence. But he hadn't come for this. For the stench. For the fear. For the queen who now ruled more like an inquisitor than a monarch. He began to spend more time abroad. His letters thinned. His praise became vague, impersonal. He offered prayers, not presents. He sent diplomats in his place. Mary noticed, and each absence deepened her resolve. If even her husband would not stand beside her in cleansing this heresy, then she would stand alone, like the saints, like the martyrs. But she was not the only one sending messages. Across the channel, the Protestant world was watching with hungry eyes. In Geneva, Frankfurt, and Strasbourg, exiled English Protestants wrote furiously. Pamphlets, sermons, diaries. They listed every name, every burning, every scream. They printed woodcuts of chained victims and flames licking at prayerful faces. They did not need to invent monsters. They simply described what they saw. And in doing so, they transformed Mary into something Europe could not unsee. Bloody Mary. The name was first whispered in the margins of Protestant texts, then inked boldly in sermons, then spoken aloud in marketplaces, crossed borders. It infected imaginations. She had tried to sanctify her rule through holy fire, but the world saw only smoke and bone. And with every new death, the myth grew louder than the truth. England, they said, had become a furnace. Its queen, a butcher wrapped in rosary beads. And the fire she lit to purify her people was burning her legacy to ash. If you've stayed this long, if you've followed her descent into faith, fury, and fire, then ask yourself this: was it devotion or delusion? Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles if you believe in confronting the past, no matter how much it stinks of smoke. And if you won't, if you'd rather look away, comment below. Tell us why silence feels safer. We already know how that story ends. She had seen the signs again. The swelling, the heaviness, the familiar nausea. It was all there just as before. But this time she told herself it would not be false. This time it would not be a punishment. Not a trick. Not a lie whispered by her body to humiliate her soul. This time it would be a child. She announced the pregnancy publicly, just as she had years earlier. Thanksgiving masses were ordered. Letters sent to Rome. Philip was informed. Cribs dusted off. Nurses recalled. She even selected godparents. A name, everything prepared. Again, her courtiers bowed. Her physicians nodded. But behind every prayer, there was hesitation. They remembered what had come before. The empty nursery, the silence, the shame. But Mary would not allow doubt. She touched her belly in public. She prayed aloud for strength. She spoke of the infant as if it were already breathing in her chambers, as if her dream could survive on devotion alone. Weeks passed, then months. No movement, no pain, no quickening, and still she waited, until the day came when waiting could no longer protect her. There was no labor, no delivery, only a slow, unbearable awareness. There was nothing inside her. Again. And this time there would be no recovery. Those who stood closest said she changed in that moment. Her body remained upright, but something in her face folded in on itself. A breaking not loud, but deep. The kind of fracture that makes no sound but never heals. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking at meals. She avoided mirrors. She refused the presence of midwives. The crib was carried away in silence. But rage has a way of finding shape. She began to whisper another theory, one more comforting than medical failure, more useful than shame. It was the Protestants, their heresy, their stubbornness, their rejection of Rome, their defilement of holy things. They were the reason God had closed her womb. They had made England unworthy of a Catholic heir. Their sin had become her curse. And with that belief her grief found purpose. She returned to policy with renewed vengeance. Not out of faith, not anymore, but out of grief, looking for something to punish. The flames would rise again, not to save souls, but to give her suffering a shape. And still no child, only smoke, and silence, and the bitter air of a country more afraid of its queen than proud of her. She believed she was cursed by God and betrayed by her people. But you're watching from comfort, feet warm, eyes dry, with truth at your fingertips. Subscribe to Chronicles, or let us know why you'd turn away from this horror. Why you'd choose not to see. Why you'd rather scroll than stay. We're listening, even if she never felt anyone was. By the final year of her reign, the Queen of England no longer resembled anything human. Her body had become a slow ruin, collapsing in chapters. She could no longer eat. Each mouthful brought nausea, retching, blood. Her once royal meals, lavish, ceremonious, had dwindled to sips of broth, then to nothing at all. The palace cooks began preparing food only out of habit. No one expected her to touch it. She could not lie down. When she tried, her distended abdomen pressed against her lungs, and she would gasp for air like a drowning woman. So she sat, hour after hour, in a specially built chair, angled upright, surrounded by damp cushions. There, she dozed, barely conscious, her neck limp, her chin sunken into her chest. The sores had spread. They began as small red patches, then split, festered, and oozed. Some leaked blood, others pus. Some emitted a thin, clear fluid that never stopped. Her bed linens were changed constantly, but they never stayed clean. Within minutes they were soaked through again. Servants wore gloves and masked their faces in perfumed cloth. Still, many vomited. Some fainted. A few refused to enter at all. Her skin darkened, first yellow from jaundice, then gray, then black, not in bruises but in patches like rotting fruit. Her fingers shriveled. The nails curled and lifted from their beds. Her toes hardened, then cracked open, leaving trails of blood on the stone floor whenever she was moved. Her breath grew sour. Her teeth loosened. Her eyes, once fire and fury, sank deep into her skull, rimmed in shadows no sleep could cure. Physicians came and went. They prescribed leeches, poultices, purgings, bleedings. They lanced her abscesses. They recited prayers. They argued quietly about what organ would fail next. But none stayed long, not out of disrespect but fear. They feared not death, but witnessing it. Because death was already in the room. It had moved in, taken root, settled in the folds of her gowns and the grain of the walls. And Mary had begun to see things. She spoke to figures no one else could see. She reached for children who weren't there. She screamed at demons that crawled along the ceiling. Sometimes she sobbed softly, begging for Catherine, her mother. Other times, she laughed at shadows, her teeth stained with blood. There were nights she called herself a prophet. There were mornings she said she was in hell. She demanded that priests say mass at her bedside daily, sometimes hourly, convinced that if they paused even once, her soul would be lost. And always, she believed someone was poisoning her. Not the disease, not the decay, someone. Protestants, courtiers, her own servants. Food left untouched, water spilled on purpose. She would only drink if it came from the hand of someone she trusted. And there were fewer of those with each passing week. She was no longer ruling. She was rotting, awake, afraid, and increasingly alone. And the court around her waited, for silence, for relief, for a body to give up what its soul had already abandoned. But it didn't, not yet. Her flesh held on, in pain, in filth, in fury. And if you think royalty guarantees dignity, if you think power can protect someone from the ugliness of disease, then you haven't been paying attention. You haven't been listening, because this was a queen, and she was dying more slowly than anyone had ever imagined. And still it wasn't over. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles if you understand that power doesn't spare anyone from suffering. And if not, tell us why in the comments. Why you'd look away now. Why you'd pretend this death isn't worth remembering. We're still watching, just like they were. She would not surrender the crown. Not to time. Not to illness. Not to the whispers just outside her door. Even as her flesh peeled away in strips, even as her body betrayed her inch by inch, she remained queen. She demanded updates on court affairs. She issued orders, though her voice was little more than a rasp carried on blood-tinged breath. And when she could no longer speak, she scratched instructions onto scraps of parchment. Her fingers trembled, her ink smudged, her letters often unreadable. But still she tried. Ministers gathered at the threshold of her chamber, noses filled with rot, faces expressionless, waiting for her scribbled decisions. Some pretended to read them. Others made decisions in her name before she could lift a pen. She was a ruler in name alone, a sovereign embalmed in her own corruption, commanding only the illusion of authority. But no one dared say it aloud. Not yet. She sat upright day after day, her hair falling out in clumps, her teeth loosening, her fingernails blackened and brittle. Her voice, once loud enough to condemn men to flames, now couldn't cross the room. She waved to servants when she could not speak. She blinked to answer questions. She scrawled blessings in Latin, hoping God would still read them. And then one morning it stopped. No final words, no sudden cry, just stillness. A single breath, wet, shallow, ragged, and then none. The silence did not feel holy, felt overdue. Her ladies did not wail. Her priests did not rejoice. The physicians, already prepared, simply turned away and whispered the words that had waited too long. She is gone. But even in death, the rot lingered. When they began to prepare the body for burial, they found the flesh already half decomposed. Parts of her were hard, dry, leathered. Other parts were soft, swollen, and seeping. The room had to be fumigated with incense so thick it made the servants dizzy. The bedding was burned, the furniture dragged out and destroyed, the walls scrubbed with vinegar, and still the stench remained. Her funeral was not the grand affair she had once imagined. It was quiet, dutiful, sparse. Attendance was thin. Mourners spoke softly, more from custom than grief. The bells rang not with sorrow, but with release. There were no crowds pressed at the palace gates, no weeping public, no flood of roses thrown onto her coffin. Only a procession that moved through cold wind and gray sky, and a burial that felt more like an exorcism than a farewell. She had ruled millions. She had burned hundreds. But she died alone, rotting from within, and history barely mourned. And yet this was a queen, her name written in blood and ash, her story buried beneath centuries of silence, ridicule, and shame. If you believe these forgotten legacies must be unearthed, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, because someone should remember, and if you don't, then tell us why. The comment box is open. Explain why her agony doesn't matter, why her descent shouldn't be told. We're still listening, and we won't look away. The wind had barely cleared the last embers of her funeral candles when the shift began. Elizabeth, her half-sister, her rival, her shadow, took the throne. No battles, no protests, no delays, as if the entire kingdom had been holding its breath, waiting for Mary's final gasp. And with that exhale, Catholic England crumbled. In a matter of days, not years, the altars came down. Latin Mass was forbidden. The crucifixes removed. The holy water poured out. The incense extinguished. Elizabeth didn't need to argue. She only needed to open the gates. The Protestant exiles, those who had fled Mary's fires, returned in waves. Preachers, printers, poets. They brought books, names, testimonies. They did not return in fear. They returned like prophets. The men Mary had condemned, burned, disfigured, scattered, were reborn as martyrs. Their stories were printed in every village. Their names read aloud in sermons. Their final words immortalized in ink and ash. And her bishops? Those loyal to Rome? Those who had whispered to her while the screams echoed outside? They were removed one by one. Some fled to France or Flanders. Others stayed and recanted, their power stripped, their robes taken. A few died alone, forgotten like the queen they served. Mary's restoration, the great Catholic return she had bled for, was undone not by war, but by ink and silence. Took 5 years to build, took 5 weeks to dismantle, and the country did not mourn. It moved forward, quickly, quietly, almost gratefully. No monuments were raised for her. No cathedrals bore her name. No coin kept her face. Only the memory of smoke, and fear, and a silence that no crown could command. The queen who had fought to save England's soul was erased from its memory. If this ending feels cruel, if you sense that something is missing, then you're beginning to understand. Because history is not kind to those it finds inconvenient. It buries them. Even the ones who wore crowns. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles if you believe these buried legacies must be brought into the light. And if you don't, leave your reason in the comments. Tell us why her name should remain ash. We won't silence you. We don't burn voices here. Mary tried to cleanse a nation with flame, but the only thing that burned was her name. Not even her bones could hold their dignity. By the time she was lowered into the crypt beneath Westminster Abbey, the rot had already spread beyond her skin. It clung to memory. It seeped into legend. It stained every prayer said in her name. She wanted to be remembered as England's savior, a martyr for the true faith, the queen who restored what had been lost. But history does not honor pain when it wears a crown. It recoils from it, distorts it, forgets it, and so she became a warning. They called her Bloody Mary, not for who she was, but for how they chose to remember her. Not the child stripped of her title. Not the daughter kneeling before a cradle that never held her heir. Not the queen with blackened limbs scratching decrees into parchment between coughs of blood. No, they remembered the flames, the smoke, the screams, her legacy reduced to fire. But here's what they never understood. Mary did not burn England because she hated it. She burned it because she couldn't bear to watch it abandon her. She believed the pain was purification. She believed the suffering, hers and theirs, would be redemptive. But suffering does not sanctify history. It only darkens it. She was not a monster by birth. She was shaped by exile, forged in betrayal, sharpened by silence. Her body rotted as her mind unraveled. And in the end, even God stayed quiet. And yet, centuries later, her story still flickers. Not with reverence, not with pity, but with that same question that hovered in her final breath. Was it worth it? A nation scalded, queen consumed, a legacy left smoking in the margins. She tried to cleanse with fire, but no one was made clean. Not her, not them, not us. Subscribe to Curse Chronicles if you believe we must drag these stories out of the crypt and into the light, no matter how much they stink of truth. And if you don't, then leave your silence in the comments. We'll know what it means. We've seen it before. And just like Mary, we won't look away.